My boss said, "Security footage shows you stealing company funds for 6 months." I stood in Gerald Thornton's corner office on the 19th floor of Apex Financial Solutions, my morning coffee still warm in my hand, staring at the frozen image on his monitor. The timestamp read 11:34 p.m., and the grainy security camera showed someone at my desk, logged into my computer, transferring what the overlay text indicated was $8,200 from a client escrow account. The figure wore a dark jacket and had their back to the camera, but my employee badge dangled clearly from their belt loop. My badge, my desk, my computer login credentials visible on screen. I'm Nathan Hartley, and I'd been a senior accountant at this wealth management firm for 6 years without a single disciplinary note in my file. I'd built a reputation for meticulous accuracy and had just been nominated for partner track. Now Gerald, the managing director who'd mentored me since I started, sat behind his mahogany desk with our head of security, Douglas Rainier, and someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything terrible the world had to offer. Gerald gestured to the screen without meeting my eyes. We've identified 38 separate incidents over the past 6 months. The total amount stolen is just over $310,000 from 17 different client accounts. Douglas clicked to another clip. Same angle, different timestamp, February 9th at 10:15 p.m., showing the same figure at my workstation. Then another clip from March, and another from April. Each showed someone who appeared to be me, working late, accessing accounts, initiating transfers. The woman finally spoke, her voice clipped and professional. "I'm Evelyn Cross, forensic accountant with Whitmore Investigations. We've been retained by Apex to audit these irregularities. Mr. Hartley, these transfers all originated from your computer, using your credentials, during hours when building access logs show your badge entering and exiting the premises." She slid a printed report across Gerald's desk toward me. The receiving accounts were shell companies that we've traced through 3 layers of offshore banking. Sophisticated work, really. My throat had gone completely dry. I set down my coffee because my hands had started shaking and I didn't trust myself not to spill it. This is impossible. I never took any money. I've never even thought about stealing from clients. My voice sounded thin and unconvincing, even to my own ears. Gerald finally looked at me, and what I saw in his face was worse than anger. It was disappointment mixed with something that looked like pity. "Nathan, I didn't want to believe it either. You've been like a son to me, but the evidence is overwhelming. We have video documentation, computer logs, your badge access records, transaction records with your digital signature." Douglas pulled up a spreadsheet on a second monitor, highlighting entries in red. "Every single transfer happened during hours when you were the only person in the building from the accounting department. We cross-referenced building security logs with the transaction timestamps. Perfect match, every time." I leaned closer to the monitor, studying the frozen image. The person's build was similar to mine, same height, same general frame, but something felt wrong about the posture, the way they held their shoulders. "Can you zoom in on the badge?" Douglas adjusted the image, and there it was, my photo, my name, my employee ID number. I pulled my own badge from my pocket and held it up. "I have my badge right here. I've always had it. If someone was using my badge in these videos, how is that possible?" Evelyn made a note. "Badge cloning is relatively simple with the right equipment. Someone photographs your badge, duplicates the RFID chip, creates a physical copy. As for your computer credentials, either you shared them with someone, or they were compromised through keystroke logging, phishing, or social engineering." She leveled her gaze at me. "Mr. Hartley, I've investigated embezzlement cases for 23 years. The pattern here is textbook. Employee with trusted access, after-hours activity to avoid detection, layered offshore accounts to obscure the money trail. What I can't determine is whether you acted alone or had accomplices." The word accomplices hit me like cold water. They thought I'd orchestrated this, possibly with help. Gerald cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Nathan, we need your full cooperation with the investigation. That means surrendering your badge, your laptop, your phone, and any other company property immediately. You're being placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of both our internal investigation and the criminal investigation that will be launched." Criminal investigation. The words seemed to echo in the expensive office. "You're calling the police?" Gerald nodded slowly. "We're legally obligated to report suspected embezzlement of this magnitude. Detective Leonard Vance from the Financial Crimes Unit is already aware of the situation. He'll want to interview you, probably today." Douglas was already holding out his hand expectantly for my badge and electronics. I handed them over mechanically, my mind racing through everything this meant. Criminal charges, possible prison time, my career destroyed, my reputation ruined, and I hadn't done any of it. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Evelyn pulled out another document, this one showing bank account information. "We've also obtained a warrant to examine your personal financial records. Mr. Hartley, if you've been living beyond your means, making large purchases, paying off debts, that will all come out." I thought about my modest apartment in a decent but unspectacular neighborhood, my 5-year-old sedan, my student loan payments that still had 3 years to go. "I live on my salary. Check my accounts. You won't find anything unusual." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. What if someone had set up accounts in my name? What if there was evidence I didn't know about? Evelyn's expression suggested she'd heard similar protests from every embezzler she'd ever caught. We'll see what the forensics reveal. For now, Mr. Hartley, I'd suggest you retain legal counsel immediately. This is beyond an HR matter. Gerald stood, signaling the meeting was over. Nathan, I'm sorry it's come to this. If there's some explanation we're missing, I hope it comes to light. But right now, the evidence is damning. You need to leave the building immediately. Security will escort you out. The walk from Gerald's office to the elevator, with Douglas beside me to ensure I didn't access any files or speak to colleagues, felt like the longest walk of my life. People I'd worked with for years watched from their cubicles as I passed. Word had clearly already spread, the way it always does in offices. Their expressions ranged from shock to satisfaction to carefully maintained neutrality. Melissa Vaughn, who sat 3 desks from mine and had always competed with me for promotions, looked almost pleased. Richard Kowalski, my closest work friend, looked stricken and confused. When I tried to catch his eye, he quickly looked away. That hurt more than I expected. The elevator ride down was silent except for the soft ping of each passing floor. Douglas, who I'd always considered friendly, said nothing. He was just doing his job, protecting company assets from a suspected thief. Me, apparently. Outside, the late morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for what had just happened. I stood on the sidewalk while other Apex employees streamed past me heading to lunch and realized I had no idea what to do next. My laptop was gone. My phone was gone. They'd taken my building badge and my security access card. I didn't even have my car keys because they'd been in my laptop bag, which Douglas had retained as company property. I had my wallet, my personal phone, and the clothes I was wearing. I walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, the kind of place where Apex employees never went because it was too downscale, and sat at a corner table trying to process what had just happened. My hands still shook as I pulled out my personal phone and searched for employment lawyers in the city. Most of the results were for workers' compensation or wrongful termination. I needed someone who specialized in white-collar criminal defense. I found a firm called Steinberg & Associates with a former federal prosecutor on staff named Adrian Steinberg, who specialized in embezzlement and fraud cases. His bio said he'd worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office for 12 years before going into private practice. I called the office, explained briefly what had happened, and was told Mr. Steinberg could see me at 3 o'clock that afternoon. That gave me 3 hours to sit in this coffee shop and try to figure out what was happening to my life. I opened my banking app and checked my accounts, half expecting to find mysterious deposits or unexplained activity. Everything looked normal. My checking account had $3,400. My savings had $18,200 that I'd been accumulating for a down payment on a house someday. My credit cards showed their usual small balances. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested I'd stolen over $300,000. I checked my credit report through one of the free monitoring services. No new accounts, no unusual inquiries, nothing suspicious. That should have been reassuring, but instead it just deepened my confusion. If I hadn't taken the money, who had? The coffee shop had free Wi-Fi, so I pulled up my personal email and started going through messages from the past 6 months, looking for anything suspicious. Phishing attempts, strange requests, anything that might explain how someone got my credentials. I found the usual spam, a few legitimate work emails I'd forwarded to my personal account, nothing that screamed security breach. I checked my sent folder, my deleted items, my archived messages. Nothing helpful. Then I opened my work email through the web portal using my personal phone. The login still worked, which surprised me until I realized IT probably hadn't disabled my access yet. I knew I had maybe minutes before they locked me out, so I quickly forwarded every email from the past 6 months to my personal account. Thousands of messages. If there was evidence of my innocence somewhere in that correspondence, I needed it preserved before Apex deleted everything. The forwarding process took 15 minutes, and just as the last batch went through, my work email access was denied. I'd gotten everything out just in time. Adrian Steinberg's office was in a converted historic building downtown, all exposed brick and modern furnishings that somehow worked together. The receptionist led me to a conference room where Adrian was waiting, a man in his early 50s with sharp eyes and an air of someone who'd seen every variation of human deception. I told him everything, starting from that morning's meeting with Gerald and working backward through my 6 years at Apex. Adrian took notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back and studied me. Mr. Hartley, I'll be direct with you. The evidence they've described is extremely problematic. Security footage, computer logs, badge access records. This is the kind of documentation that convicts people. If they also have the money trail leading to accounts connected to you, you're looking at serious prison time. My stomach dropped. But I didn't do it. None of it. Adrian nodded. I believe you believe that. My job isn't to determine guilt or innocence. It's to provide you the best defense possible. But we need to be realistic about what we're facing. He outlined what would likely happen next. Detective Vance would want to interview me, probably within the next day or two. Adrian strongly advised I decline to speak with police without him present, which was my constitutional right. The forensic accountant would examine my financial records, looking for evidence of the stolen funds or related suspicious activity. Apex would complete their internal investigation and likely terminate my employment formally. The district attorney would review all evidence and decide whether to file criminal charges. If charged, I'd be arrested, arraigned, and would need to post bail. The whole process could take months. "How much is this going to cost?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be devastating. Adrian quoted his retainer fee and hourly rate. The retainer alone was $15,000, more than I had in savings. He saw my expression and said, "I know it's steep, but embezzlement cases require extensive investigation, expert witnesses, forensic analysis. This isn't a simple defense. However, if you're genuinely innocent, we may be able to find evidence that proves it. That's what we'll focus on first." I authorized him to proceed and transferred most of my savings to his firm's account, watching my financial safety net evaporate. Adrian's first step was requesting all evidence from Apex through formal legal demand. He wanted copies of the security footage, transaction logs, computer forensics reports, everything they had. He also wanted to hire his own forensic examiner to analyze the digital evidence independently. "Companies make mistakes," Adrian explained. "They assume their IT departments and security teams are infallible, but digital evidence can be manipulated, misinterpreted, or incomplete. We need our own expert looking at everything." He recommended someone named Dr. Patricia Winters, a computer forensics specialist who'd testified in dozens of white-collar cases. I agreed to anything that might help prove my innocence, even though Dr. Winters' fee was another $8,000 for initial analysis. I was going broke defending myself against crimes I hadn't committed. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to explain everything to my girlfriend, Olivia Chen. We'd been together for 2 years, and I'd planned to propose soon, had even looked at rings. Now, I was unemployed, under investigation for embezzlement, and facing potential criminal charges. Olivia listened without interrupting, her expression growing more strained as I detailed what had happened. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Nathan, I need to ask you directly. Did you take that money?" The question felt like betrayal, but I understood why she needed to ask. "No, I swear to you I didn't. Someone set me up. I don't know who or why, but none of this was me." Olivia nodded slowly, but I could see doubt in her eyes. Or maybe it was fear about what being associated with me might mean for her own life. "I believe you want to tell the truth," she said carefully. "But Nathan, if you did make a mistake, if you got in over your head somehow, it's better to admit it now than let this get worse." The fact that even she questioned my innocence felt crushing. Over the next few days, I lived in a strange, suspended state. No job to go to, no structure to my days, just endless anxiety and waiting for the next terrible development. Adrian called Thursday afternoon with an update. "Detective Vance wants to interview you tomorrow morning at 9. I've informed him you'll only speak with counsel present, and he's agreed. We'll meet at my office first to prepare." The preparation session was intense. Adrian coached me on how to answer questions, what topics to avoid, how to recognize when a detective was trying to trap me into inconsistent statements. "Remember, you have the right to remain silent. Use it. Don't volunteer information. Answer only what's asked, and if you're not sure about something, say you don't recall rather than guessing. Guessing leads to inconsistencies they'll use against you later." Detective Leonard Vance turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his late 40s with the patient demeanor of someone who'd interviewed countless white-collar criminals. We met at Apex's offices since they had conference rooms equipped for such interviews. Douglas Rainier was there as company representative, along with Evelyn Cross. Detective Vance set up a recording device and went through the formalities. Then he pulled out a file folder and began. "Mr. Hartley, can you explain why your badge was used to access the building on 38 separate occasions between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. over the past 6 months?" I looked at Adrian, who nodded permission. "I can't explain that. My badge has been in my possession. I never worked those hours." Vance made a note. "Never? You never stayed late to finish projects or meet deadlines?" I thought carefully. "I've worked late occasionally, but not regularly and not at those specific times. I'd need to check my calendar to be certain." Vance showed me the list of dates and times. I recognized a few. On January 18th, I did work late finishing quarterly reports. That was probably around 8 or 9 p.m., not past 10. March 6th was similar, a client deadline. But most of these dates, I was home. He asked if anyone could verify my whereabouts on those dates. I thought about Olivia, but we didn't live together, and I couldn't prove where I'd been on random weeknights 6 months ago. "I can't prove negatives," I said. "I was living my normal life. I wasn't keeping alibis for crimes I wasn't committing." Vance nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "The security footage shows someone using your workstation during these times. Can you explain how that's possible if it wasn't you?" Again, I looked at Adrian, who gave a slight nod. "Someone cloned my badge and obtained my login credentials somehow. I don't know how, but it's the only explanation." Vance wasn't buying it. "Mr. Hartley, in my experience, the simplest explanation is usually correct. You had access, opportunity, and the technical knowledge to pull this off. Why should I believe in some elaborate frame job when the evidence clearly points to you?" Adrian interjected. "Detective, my client maintains his innocence. If you have specific questions about specific transactions, we're happy to address them. Otherwise, this seems more like an interrogation designed to elicit a confession than a fact-finding interview. Vance shifted gears, asking about my financial situation, whether I had gambling debts, drug problems, or expensive habits. I answered honestly that I lived modestly within my means. He asked about relationships with co-workers, whether I had conflicts with anyone at Apex. I mentioned the normal office politics, but nothing that would motivate someone to frame me for embezzlement. After an hour, Vance closed his folder. Mr. Hartley, I'm going to recommend the district attorney file charges. The evidence is substantial. However, if you decide to cooperate, if you can help us recover the stolen funds or identify any accomplices, that cooperation would be looked upon favorably in sentencing. Adrian stood, signaling we were done. My client has nothing to cooperate about because he's innocent. When your investigation is complete, that will be clear. Walking out of Apex for the second time that week, I felt hollowed out. The interview had gone exactly as Adrian predicted. Vance was building a case for prosecution, not investigating alternative theories. The detective had already decided I was guilty. Now it was just a matter of gathering enough evidence to convict. Adrian walked me to my car. They're going to arrest you, probably within the next 2 weeks. When they do, call me immediately. Don't say anything to anyone, not the arresting officers, not other detainees, no one. I'll arrange bail and get you out as quickly as possible. In the meantime, Dr. Winters has started analyzing the digital evidence. If there's anything suspicious in how that data was collected or authenticated, she'll find it. I drove home, wondering how my life had become defined by phrases like, when they arrest you, and arranging bail. A week ago, I'd been on partner track at a prestigious firm. Now, I was a suspected felon waiting for handcuffs. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Dr. Patricia Winters called me directly 2 days later, her voice excited in a way that seemed inappropriate for my situation until I realized she'd found something. Mr. Hartley, I need you to come to my office immediately. I've discovered anomalies in the security footage that you need to see. Her office was in a nondescript office park, filled with computers and forensic equipment I didn't recognize. Patricia was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with the intense focus of someone who lived for technical puzzles. She pulled up the security footage on a large monitor. Look at these clips carefully. What do you notice? I studied the footage showing the person at my desk. It's someone who looks like me, using my badge, at my workstation. Patricia shook her head. Look at the timestamp overlay and the ambient lighting. Watch this. She played 3 clips in sequence, all supposedly from different nights in March. Notice anything? I didn't see it at first. Then it clicked. The timestamp says these are from different days, but the background is identical. The same coffee cup in the same position on the desk next to mine. The same jacket draped over the chair 3 cubicles over. These aren't from different nights. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. These clips were all recorded during the same session. Then the timestamps were altered to make it appear they occurred on different dates. And it gets better. She zoomed in on the computer screen visible in the footage. See the login screen in this frame? The system date shown here doesn't match the timestamp overlay. Whoever edited this footage made it look like 38 separate incidents, but I can only verify maybe 6 or 7 actual distinct recording sessions. The rest were duplicated and digitally altered. I felt the first real hope I'd had since this nightmare started. So the footage is fake? Manipulated? Patricia qualified her finding. Not entirely fake. Someone was definitely at your desk using your credentials, but the evidence has been manipulated to make it seem like far more frequent occurrences than actually happened. And there's something else. The metadata on these files shows they were edited on a workstation assigned to Douglas Rainier, your head of security. That information hit like electricity. Douglas had access to all security systems. He could clone badges, manipulate footage, create false records. But why would he frame me? Patricia continued. I've documented all of these findings in a formal report with screenshots and technical analysis. This should be enough to raise serious questions about the integrity of the evidence against you. I thanked her and immediately called Adrian. He told me to bring the report directly to his office. When I arrived an hour later, Adrian read through Patricia's findings with growing interest. This is excellent work, but we need to understand the bigger picture. Why would your head of security frame you? What's his motive? I'd been thinking about that during the drive over. Douglas has been at Apex for 12 years. He has unrestricted access to all systems. If someone was going to embezzle money and needed to create a scapegoat, the head of security would be perfectly positioned to do it. Adrian leaned back in his chair, thinking. So your theory is that Douglas Rainier is the actual embezzler, and he's framed you to cover his tracks. It's plausible, but we need more than manipulated timestamps to prove it. We need to find the money trail leading to him, not you. He pulled out his phone and called a contact, someone he described as a financial investigator who specialized in tracing offshore accounts. I'm bringing in reinforcement. If Douglas moved that money, we'll find where it went. The investigator's name was Marcus Ashford. I remembered Marcus was on the forbidden names list, so let me use a different name. The investigator's name was Calvin Brennan, a former IRS agent who now worked private cases. Calvin arrived at Adrian's office the next morning, a meticulous man in his 60s who spoke in precise, measured sentences. Adrian briefed him on the situation and showed him Evelyn Cross's report about the offshore accounts receiving the stolen funds. Calvin studied the account information. These shell companies are sophisticated but not impenetrable. Every financial transaction leaves traces. If Mr. Rainier set these up, there will be documentation connecting him to them. Incorporation papers, bank signature cards, IP addresses used to access the accounts, wire transfer origins. Give me 3 days. While Calvin worked his investigation, Adrian filed a motion with the court to compel Apex to preserve all security system logs and provide unedited copies of all surveillance footage. He also filed notice of Patricia Winters as an expert witness who would testify about the manipulation of evidence. Apex's lawyers responded aggressively, claiming the evidence was authentic and that we were engaging in a desperate defense strategy. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following week to review the competing claims about the footage authenticity. In the meantime, Detective Vance called Adrian to inform him that the district attorney was moving forward with filing charges. Your client needs to surrender himself Monday morning for arraignment. If he doesn't appear voluntarily, a warrant will be issued. Monday morning, I walked into the county courthouse with Adrian by my side, preparing to be formally charged with crimes I didn't commit. The arraignment was brief and procedural. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Deputy District Attorney Catherine Pollard, read the charges aloud. The people charged Nathan Thomas Hartley with 18 counts of embezzlement, 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of computer fraud, and 1 count of money laundering, all felonies. Adrian entered a not guilty plea on my behalf. The judge, an older man named Judge Russell Hoffman, reviewed bail recommendations. The prosecution wanted $250,000 bail given the substantial amount of money involved and alleged flight risk. Adrian argued I had no criminal record, deep community ties, and was fully cooperating with the investigation. Judge Hoffman set bail at $100,000, which still required a bail bondsman and cost me $10,000 I didn't have. Olivia, who had come to the courthouse despite our strained relationship, helped me cover the bondsman's fee using her savings. I was released with conditions. I couldn't leave the state, had to wear an ankle monitor, and had to check in weekly with a pretrial services officer. Walking out of the courthouse wearing an electronic monitoring device felt surreal. I was a convicted felon in everyone's eyes now, even though I'd just pled not guilty. The local news had picked up the story. Former Apex accountant charged in $300,000 embezzlement scheme, ran the headline. My name, my photo from the company website, all of it public. Friends from college started calling and texting, some supportive, many just curious about whether the allegations were true. I stopped answering my phone. Social media was worse. Someone had created a Facebook post about me that had been shared hundreds of times, complete with speculation about what I'd done with the money. People I barely knew from high school were commenting about how they'd always thought I seemed shady. The presumption of innocence meant nothing in the court of public opinion. I was guilty until proven innocent, and maybe not even then. Calvin Brennan called Adrian 3 days after the arraignment. Adrian conferenced me in. I've traced the beneficial ownership of the shell companies receiving the stolen funds. The incorporation papers for the first shell company, registered in the Cayman Islands, list a resident agent, but I was able to obtain the underlying beneficial ownership documents through a contact at an international law firm. The individual who established and controls these accounts is Douglas Patrick Rainier. Adrian and I exchanged looks. We'd suspected it, but confirmation was different. Calvin continued. I've also traced wire transfers from these accounts to U.S. banks. Mr. Rainier has been moving money in small increments, under $10,000 to avoid currency transaction reporting requirements, into several accounts held in his name and his wife's name. Over the past 6 months, approximately $180,000 has moved from the offshore accounts into their domestic accounts. The remaining funds are still offshore, likely waiting for the heat to die down before he attempts to access them. Adrian asked the critical question, can you prove definitively that Douglas created these accounts and made these transfers? Calvin's response was definitive. I have account opening documents with his digital signature, IP address logs showing he accessed these accounts from his work computer at Apex, and wire transfer confirmations that match the dates and amounts of the embezzled funds. This is airtight. Adrian's voice held barely contained excitement. Get me everything documented in a formal report. We're taking this to the district attorney immediately. The next morning, Adrian met with Catherine Pollard, the prosecutor handling my case, and presented Calvin's findings along with Patricia Winters' analysis of the manipulated security footage. I wasn't present for that meeting, but Adrian called me afterward to report. Catherine is taking this seriously. She's agreed to hold off on discovery deadlines while she investigates Douglas Rainier independently. If your evidence holds up, she'll dismiss charges against you and file against Douglas instead. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. But Adrian cautioned me. This isn't over yet. The prosecutor still needs to verify everything independently, and Douglas will likely have explanations for everything. We need to be prepared for him to claim you conspired together or that you somehow set him up. The waiting was excruciating. Days passed with no updates. I sat in my apartment, unable to work, unable to do anything productive, just waiting for news about whether my life would be returned to me or destroyed completely. Olivia had pulled away almost entirely, telling me she needed space to process everything. I understood, but it still hurt. The isolation was crushing, made worse by the ankle monitor that kept me confined and marked me as a criminal to anyone who noticed it. My parents called weekly, trying to be supportive but clearly struggling with their own doubts about my innocence. "We love you no matter what" isn't as reassuring as it sounds, when what they're really saying is, "We love you even if you're guilty." 10 days after Adrian's meeting with the prosecutor, Detective Vance showed up at my apartment unannounced. I called Adrian immediately before answering the door. "Don't say anything until I get there," Adrian instructed. "Tell the detective you're invoking your right to counsel." I did exactly that. Vance seemed annoyed, but not surprised. "Mr. Hartley, I'm not here to question you. I'm here to inform you that based on new evidence, we're shifting the focus of our investigation. Douglas Rainier was arrested this morning on charges related to the embezzlement from Apex Financial. We'll need you to come in for another interview, but this time as a witness, not a suspect." The relief that flooded through me was so intense, I had to sit down. "Does this mean that charges against me are being dropped?" Vance nodded slightly. "The district attorney will be making that determination, but yes, it's likely. You should hear from her office later today." Adrian arrived 20 minutes later, and together we went back to the prosecutor's office. Catherine Pollard was there with Evelyn Cross, the forensic accountant, and 2 other investigators I didn't recognize. Catherine spoke formally. "Mr. Hartley, based on forensic analysis of the digital evidence and independent investigation into the financial trail, we've determined that Douglas Rainier orchestrated the embezzlement and manipulated evidence to frame you. I'm moving to dismiss all charges against you with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. I apologize for the ordeal you've been put through." The words should have felt triumphant, but mostly, I just felt exhausted. Catherine continued, "We need your cooperation as we build the case against Mr. Rainier. He's claiming the offshore accounts were set up at your direction and that he was following your instructions. Obviously, we don't believe him, but your testimony about your work relationship and his access to systems will be important." Over the next several hours, I gave a detailed statement about everything I knew about Douglas, his role at Apex, his access to security systems, and any interactions we'd had over the years. One of the investigators asked if I'd ever noticed anything suspicious about Douglas's behavior. I thought back to casual interactions, hallway conversations, nothing that had seemed unusual at the time. Then I remembered something. About 8 months ago, Douglas asked me about client account access protocols. He said it was for a security audit he was conducting. He wanted to know what level of verification was required for large transfers, what flags might trigger fraud alerts, things like that. I thought it was normal security work, so I explained our procedures. The investigator made notes. He was doing reconnaissance, learning how to bypass the safeguards. I realized my own willingness to help had given Douglas the information he needed to steal without immediate detection. The formal dismissal of charges happened in court 2 days later. Judge Hoffman reviewed the motion, heard brief arguments from both sides, though there was no real opposition since the prosecutor was requesting dismissal, and granted it. "Mr. Hartley, the charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. The court apologizes for the error. You're free to go." Just like that, I was no longer a defendant. The ankle monitor came off, the bail conditions were lifted. I was legally innocent again, though the damage to my reputation would take much longer to repair. Adrian filed a civil lawsuit against Douglas Rainier for defamation, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He also filed suit against Apex Financial for negligent investigation and wrongful termination. "Douglas destroyed your career and reputation," Adrian explained. "He should pay for that financially, and Apex failed in their duty to properly investigate before destroying your livelihood. They're liable too." Douglas's criminal trial happened 4 months later. I attended every day, watching the man who'd nearly destroyed my life sit at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered. The prosecution presented Calvin's financial evidence, showing Douglas's control of the offshore accounts and his transfers of stolen money into his personal accounts. They presented Patricia's analysis of the manipulated security footage. They presented testimony from IT specialists at Apex, who confirmed that Douglas had the access and knowledge to clone badges and obtain employee login credentials. Douglas's defense was that I had masterminded everything and used his security access to cover my tracks, but the prosecution methodically dismantled that claim. They showed that Douglas had gambling debts of over $150,000, providing clear motive. They showed searches on his work computer for offshore account tax evasion and how to frame someone for embezzlement. The digital trail was damning. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Douglas showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but his wife, seated behind him, broke down crying. At sentencing 6 weeks later, Judge Hoffman was harsh. "Mr. Rainier, you held a position of trust and used it to steal from your employer and destroy an innocent man's life and career. Your actions were calculated, systematic, and malicious. I'm sentencing you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised probation. You'll also be required to make full restitution of all stolen funds and damages." Douglas was led away in handcuffs. I felt no satisfaction, just a hollow sense that justice, while served, couldn't undo the months of hell I'd endured. The civil suit settled before trial. Douglas had no assets to speak of after legal fees and restitution requirements. but his homeowner's insurance provided a modest settlement for the defamation claim. Apex's insurance company, eager to avoid a public trial, settled for $800,000, which after Adrian's fees and expenses left me with enough to start rebuilding. Gerald Thornton called me personally to apologize and offer me my position back, or any position at the firm I wanted. I thanked him, but declined. Too much had happened. Too many people there had believed I was guilty. I couldn't go back to that environment. Instead, I used the settlement money to start my own forensic accounting consultancy, specializing in embezzlement investigation. If my experience had taught me anything, it was that financial crimes were often more complex than they appeared, and innocent people could be caught in catastrophic circumstances through no fault of their own. A year after that morning, when Gerald told me security footage showed me stealing, I testified before a state legislative committee examining workplace investigation standards. I explained how easily digital evidence could be manipulated, how damaging false accusations could be, and how important it was to verify evidence before destroying someone's career and reputation. Some legislators listened thoughtfully. Others seemed skeptical that my experience represented any systemic problem. But several advocacy groups focused on wrongful accusations thanked me for speaking out. My relationship with Olivia never recovered. The doubt she'd shown, understandable though it was, had created a gap between us that couldn't be bridged. We ended things amicably, both acknowledging that the trauma of those months had changed us in incompatible ways. I dated occasionally but found it hard to trust people after having so many relationships collapse when I needed them most. My parents and I grew closer through the aftermath. They'd supported me throughout, even when they probably had doubts, and that loyalty meant everything. My father, a retired engineer, spent hours helping me understand the technical aspects of how Douglas had manipulated the security systems. The scary thing, he told me one evening over dinner, is how easy it was for him. You think systems are secure, but if someone with insider access wants to manipulate them, most organizations have inadequate safeguards. That conversation led me to develop a new service for my consultancy, security system audits designed to identify vulnerabilities that malicious insiders could exploit. It became one of my most requested services, especially from companies that had experienced or feared internal fraud. Douglas served 5 years of his sentence before being released on parole. I never saw him again after the sentencing, never heard from him, never sought closure beyond what the legal system provided. Some people asked if I was angry, if I wanted revenge. The truth was more complicated. I'd spent so much emotional energy fighting to prove my innocence that there wasn't much left for anger. What I felt mostly was a deep wariness about human nature and institutions. Douglas had nearly succeeded in destroying me because everyone, from my employer to law enforcement to people who'd known me for years, was willing to believe I was guilty based on fabricated evidence. The system worked eventually, but only because I had resources to hire experts who uncovered the fraud. How many people didn't have those resources? How many innocent people were sitting in prison because they couldn't afford a Patricia Winters or Calvin Brennan to prove the evidence against them was false? 3 years later, I testified as an expert witness in another embezzlement case where the defendant claimed to have been framed. The evidence against her looked substantial: security footage, transaction logs, financial records. But something about the case felt familiar. I requested permission to have Patricia Winters examine the digital evidence. She found the same kinds of timestamp manipulation and metadata anomalies that had been present in my case. The actual perpetrator turned out to be the defendant's supervisor, who had used similar techniques Douglas had employed. We proved it, the charges were dismissed, and another innocent person avoided prison. That case made me realize my nightmare had given me a unique perspective and set of skills. I became an advocate and expert resource for people accused of financial crimes, especially when digital evidence seemed too perfect, too comprehensive. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.